Welcome, everyone. I am Jeff Lewis.
And I'm Tim Kowal. Both Jeff and I are certified appellate specialists, and as uncertified podcast hosts, we try to bring our audience of trial and appellate attorneys some legal news and insights they can use in their practice. As always, we are grateful if you would refer this podcast to a colleague if you find it helpful.
Yeah, before we jump into this week's interview, we want to thank Casetext for sponsoring our podcast. Casetext is a legal technology company that's developed AI-backed tools to help lawyers practice more efficiently since 2013. Casetext is relied on by 10,000 firms nationwide, from solo practitioners to AmLaw 200 firms and in-house legal departments. In March 2023, Casetext launched CoCounsel, the world's first AI legal assistant. CoCounsel produces results lawyers can rely on for professional use, all while maintaining security and privacy. Listeners of our podcast enjoy a special discount on Casetext Basic Research at casetext.com/CALP. That's casetext.com/CALP.
All right, Jeff, today is a Friday, and we've got kind of a Friday topic queued up today. We're welcoming Gary Wax to the show. Gary is, and we're going to talk about some movies. Gary is an appellate lawyer with Grinas, Martin, Stein, and Richland. Before joining GMSR as an appellate lawyer, Gary worked in the film industry as a creative executive, where he acquired distribution rights for feature films such as the Oscar-nominated City of God. Gary's bio on his website, Jeff, I found this interesting. It lists his top 5 favorite legal films of all time, which we will talk about and critique today when we talk with Gary. And Gary also says in his bio to ask Gary about the rest of his top 500 movie rankings. So that's what we're here to do today, to talk a little film and the law. So welcome, Gary, to the podcast. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, I think this is going to be a fun conversation. Before we jump into the fun stuff and talk about movies and the law, tell us a little bit about your appellate practice.
Sure. So as you said, I'm an appellate lawyer with Grinas, Martin, Stein, and Richland, and we handle civil appeals to represent winners and losers, defendants and plaintiffs. The cases that I work on kind of run the gamut. Sometimes, working for kind of big business kind of people, and a lot of times individuals. So I love the ability to kind of have a new challenge each time I get on a new case.
And that's a fantastic bio, but he left out that he went to a top-notch law school, Loyola Law School.
There you go. Are you also a Loyola grad?
Indeed, I am. Yeah.
Nice.
Oh, yeah. What tipped you off?
All right. I have nothing but great things to say about Loyola. It was a great experience.
And Gary, you went from the film industry into law. Tell us about that progression.
Sure. So let's see. For undergrad, I went to NYU Film School. Always planned on working in the movie business. Never had any thoughts about being a lawyer at that point in my life. Made a student film at NYU based on the Kurt Vonnegut book, Harrison Bergeron, which about a year after I graduated, Showtime turned it into a movie also, which of course I think mine is better, but you can be the judge. And then I moved out to Los Angeles a pretty short time after graduating, and worked at a few different distribution companies, international distribution, some kind of more like distribution companies that don't exist anymore. And then I ended up working for Miramax Films, which also doesn't exist anymore, but I worked there for 6 years and worked in the acquisitions department, kind of getting to go to all the film festivals and scoping out movies that were financed outside the studio system, looking for distribution. And then after that, Miramax kind of imploded when I think Disney probably discovered what was going on with the head of the company that they owned. And they got rid of Harvey and Bob and most of the rest of the company, and just kind of absorbed the label into Disney. And I found myself looking for a new job. And I had this kind of moment of, what am I doing? I had the entertainment industry is so fickle in terms of you lose jobs based on things that have nothing to do with the merits of your work. And here I was, I had already reached the top of the industry, and I felt like anywhere where I was going to go after that was going to be a step back. And I kind of looked around, and of course, my dad always telling me, you should go to law school, you should go to law school. And it hit me that my bosses in film acquisitions, which was what I liked doing, were always lawyers, and that I was never going to be a boss doing that anyway until I had a law degree. So I decided, okay, maybe law school is for me, and maybe at the end of it, I'll find something that I like doing in the legal profession that's outside of the entertainment industry. But at worst case, at least I'll be in a position to kind of be the boss and not have to, be the little minion running around taking orders from the boss.
Yeah, that's interesting. So was your intention when you went to law school that you would segue back into entertainment?
I really hoped that I wouldn't. I mean, at that point, I already
done by that
decided
time.
like I'd kind of had enough and felt like I probably would find something that I really enjoyed doing in law school. I just wasn't sure what it was yet.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, that's I was involved a little bit in music before I went to law school. I also took a little bit of a sojourn after undergrad, and I was trying to find some way that, well, maybe law and music will intersect. Maybe I'll be an entertainment lawyer. Till I realized I don't want to babysit musicians, and so it didn't find a marriage there at all. Sounded like it was similar for you, but why appellate law? So we went from entertainment to law. What took you into appellate law specifically?
It was a wonderful chance of events that happened. While I was, I think, in my second year of law school, I was having dinner at a friend's house who is a senior partner at my firm. And I've, probably for the first time really took interest in what it was that she did, and kind of asked her all about being an appellate lawyer. And as she talked about it, I thought to myself, wow, this sounds like something I would really enjoy, because I love writing. I mean, I started out kind of as a screenwriter, and it felt kind of like a natural progression. I never really saw myself as a litigator. So it felt like maybe this could be the thing. And I said to her, do you guys hire law students? And she said, oh yeah, I'll put you in touch with the person who hires our law clerks. And the rest is history. They've not been able to get rid of me ever since.
Now, it seems like a little bit of pain and discomfort for a lot of appellate lawyers, because there's obviously a fascination and appreciation of the litigation process. You have to understand it very well and have have an experience, a lot of experiences under your belt in the trial court. But a lot of appellate attorneys don't actually like trying cases or being in court. They like writing about it and picking apart, what happened, what should have happened.
Right.
So how did you get from fresh out of law school, not knowing anything except what you read out of the law books about litigation, to the point where you can serve as a appellate counsel, embedded appellate counsel, serving with trial counsel to make sure the trial goes right, when like a lot of appellate attorneys, we prefer to skip over that step and get right to the appeal.
Right. Well, I mean, I continued as a law clerk after graduating, and got to really learn appellate law, and got to, sit in on trials while I was doing that, read all sorts of wonderfully written briefs, and kind of learn how it should be done, and learned a little bit more about litigation, because obviously you have to know something about litigation to be an appellate lawyer. So learned mostly about it by reading and sitting in and watching the pros do it.
Now, you mentioned reading a lot of good briefs. You must have also read, for every good legal brief you read, you probably have to read about 30 or 40 bad to terrible legal briefs. So
Right.
What have you picked up about good and bad practices of legal writing, and maybe specifically about, a lot of attorneys like to put little flourishes in our writing, including even film references. You must have an opinion about using pop culture and film references in legal writing.
Yeah, usually the pop culture references that I might put in my briefs don't make it to the final draft, because they're kind of fun in the moment when you think about them. But when you realize, like, oh, that's no one's going to get that, or who knows if the justices have even seen that movie, and you kind of begrudgingly take it out because you realize it was more for your own enjoyment than really trying to win the case. I definitely have read a lot of bad briefs. They're usually not from our firm, they're from the other side, so I've gotten used to that, and trying to, it's almost easier to respond to an excellent brief than it is to a terrible brief, because when you get a terrible brief, you have this moment of like, well, what does this even say? And I was planning on arguing X, but I don't want to help make the other side's argument because they never really made that argument. And so sometimes that's actually a really big challenge when you get a poorly written brief to figure out how much you want to take the ride with them or how much you kind of want to help out the brief, to make sense of it so that you can respond to it and knock down their argument.
Yeah, that's right. Because you don't want to engage in straw manning. You want to steel man the brief, but then again, you don't want to spend your time erecting the steel man if they didn't bother doing it themselves.
Right. Exactly. I would say in terms of pop culture references, they have to be used very sparingly, and it has to be a reference that you feel confident that anyone who's not living under a rock would know, because otherwise it's just going to be so counterproductive.
Does that gets harder these days because you don't have the amount of blockbusters, you don't have Friends and Seinfeld, those types of shows that are watched by tens of millions of people. A hit show gets a few 100,000, or a million or two, and you cannot count on having a universal audience for making a reference to entertainment that is segmented like it is today.
True, and it's something that might be well known to people of our generation. Might be like go right over the heads of people of our kids' generation. It probably will actually. So I tend to stay away from that stuff.
Yeah, today I was trying to tell my office staff about Dr. Shrinker, a Saturday morning show, and they had no idea what I was talking about. I'm sure you guys remember Dr. Shrinker, right?
Yeah.
I don't remember Dr. Stryker.
Well, check it out on YouTube.
Yeah, I've made a Lucy and Ethel reference in a brief once. I figured that's got to be universal enough. Everyone at least knows who Lucy and Ethel were.
Right.
Gary, do you have any stories of litigation mistakes that either you've made, I'm sure you've made none, or that you've seen someone else make that you won't soon forget?
I mean, the biggest one, and I'm sure you guys know what I'm talking about, is when you're reading a transcript and they say, okay, let's go off the record. That's always the biggest mistake in the appellate world, because that's where a lot of the juice is happening. And I never understand. I'm banging my head against the table and yelling out loud, no, do not go off the record. You were just talking about something really important, and I want to hear that objection.
That's right. Yeah, that's why you need to have embedded appellate counsel so they can jump up and down every time they hear the words off the record.
Right. And actually, the last trial that I was monitoring, the judge was the person who kept saying, let's do this off the record, and he was very adamant about it. And it made it difficult, I think, for counsel to say, like, well, can we have the reporter join us, because he clearly felt like it needed to be off the record, and I kept saying no, but it's obviously you don't want to upset the judge, and so that's always kind of a challenge when you're in the trenches and litigating a case, because there's always this push and pull of you want to get everything on the record, but if you see that it's upsetting the judge, or the judge is trying to move on, or whatever it is, you have to do it very carefully to make sure that he understands why you're doing it, or she understands.
Right.
And before we go to the movies here, let's just touch on oral argument. Do you have any special take on oral argument from your background in film? You try to infuse any theatrics or drama into your oral argument approach?
I do not. I try to just be deferential, and so I get stressed out about just trying to remember everything that I'm supposed to remember and not rely on my notes. And so for me, I put so much energy into lowering my stress levels so that I can walk in there calmly and have a conversation with the panel, instead of standing up there and, trying to feel like I have to give some canned speech, because it's easy to get stuck in that pattern. You've written something and this looks great on paper, but when you get in front of the panel, it's so important to have a conversation with them. So that's always my focus, is to be as calm as possible.
Yeah. I came across I think it's a screenwriting term, attack and defend. when you're writing dialogue, there's a attack and defend when you're talking about a colloquy between two people, and they have a conflict and they're advancing it forward, and you're exploring each other's points of view. And I thought that relates a bit to oral argument. When you get a question from the panel on oral argument, it's a little bit like an attack and defend. It's not necessarily, the panel member is not necessarily antagonistic to your point of view, but they want to press on your position a little bit and see, if it's a relatively soft or a firm position, based on how you come back. If you got a very firm response, or maybe it's an equivocal response, and you can acknowledge that there is some room for disagreement there. But I thought it's a good way, I thought, of the exploring the purpose of oral argument is to kind of gauge the relative strengths and weaknesses of various arguments.
I've also noticed, actually, and it took me a few years to figure this out, that not every question that comes from the panel is an adverse question that you have to fight about. And, it took me a while to realize, like, sometimes they're actually giving you friendly questions or just kind of poking around. And it's not so much that you have to be in attack mode, but that's part of the listening process of, oh no, this question is helpful to me. I can turn this into something positive to say back to them that will maybe get the other judges on the panel to really understand where I'm coming from.
Yeah. And I think in my earlier years of litigating and doing oral argument, whenever I got a question and I knew that the answer had to be no or yes, depending on what my position was, then the first word out of my mouth had to be an emphatic no or yes, and then quickly scramble to find the reasons why. Right. Even if it was just kind of a soft no or a soft yes, and it could go the other way, you have to be unequivocal about it.
Right.
And I wonder if it's better just to show the panel that Your Honor, no, I think the answer to that question is no, and here's why. And I understand that there could be a different opinion there, but to show a little bit of vulnerability and humility in the arguments, because we're not, it's not always black and white, and the court does have hard questions to decide.
Yeah, I was in front of the BAP yesterday, and I saw 6 arguments before me up in Pasadena, and I saw a couple lawyers who really fought the judges on some questions maybe they should have conceded. And you could just see it was like blood in the water. Once, a lawyer fights a judge on a simple concession, they were merciless. It was a good lesson for me in surrendering in some areas where you could do so without, maybe lose a battle, but still save the war in terms of the appeal.
And also, I think it absolutely matters whether you're in federal or state court, because as we know, you walk into state court for an oral argument, and they've all made up their minds anyway. And so much of oral argument, I think, is trying to figure out if they've decided that you won or lost. Yeah. Whereas in federal court, so much of it is educating them, because a lot of times they really don't know much about the case. And so I find that it's a very different exercise when it's state court versus federal court for that reason. And in state court, I want to know, did I win or lose? Give me questions, because I want to know where you guys are headed with that.
Well, that was my last question. Should state appellate courts, or any court for that matter, use focus letters or tentative opinions? Or is that too much of a spoiler?
No, do it. I love it. I mean, first of all, it's, for me, just selfishly, it brings my stress level down. If I know exactly where they're going, even if it's that I'm going to lose, I'm less stressed about it, because at least I know where I stand and I know where I need to go with my argument. And I'm not playing that guessing game of, am I going to win or lose or whatever it is. And so I really appreciate those tentative opinions for sure.
Yeah, I agree with you. I did an oral argument once where we talked about what I thought were the key issues for the entire time, and then I got one parting shot at the end that talked about an issue that I thought was not worth talking about, and I thought, oh my God, should I have refocused my argument? Did I blow it by not raising that issue? Turns out I didn't. It was just I was terrorized for no reason. But,
right. There was just justice was curious about something, and just personal curiosity about it or something.
Personal curiosity. That justice was not even the one writing the opinion, it turned out. But, well, Gary, let's go to the movies now.
All right.
We talked about you've watched a lot of lawyer movies. You watch a lot of movies, period.
Yeah.
And you must have opinions. You've ranked over 500 movies in this personal list that you shared with me. And on your bio, it says, ask Gary about his top 500 movies of all time. But I want to talk about your top 5 list of favorite lawyer movies.
Yes.
But I thought before we get to that, we'll we're going to build up to that. We're going to build up to the denouement there. Let's first check in with the zeitgeist. I went to IMDb to find out what they say their top 10 legal movies are. I thought I'd go down this list briefly and then have you chime in on whether you agree. We don't have to quibble about about its specific ranking position, but let's see if you agree whether it is a must-see movie for lawyers, and maybe a few words why. So the top legal movie according to IMDb is 12 Angry Men. What say you, Gary?
That's also my number one legal movie of all time. I think that's it's such a unique movie because it's really the only one that I can think of, at least, that takes place in the jury room. And there's so much mystery that goes on about what happens in jury rooms and how do cases get decided, and does one person kind of take over the discussion, or is it kind of a team effort, or how that works? And so from that standpoint, I think it's fascinating because it is really, I don't know if it's the whole movie or most of the movie takes place in the jury room.
You're right, yeah.
And so I just think it's fascinating, and anyone who's going to serve on a jury should absolutely watch that movie and then realize that when you actually sit in a jury room, none of the cases are that exciting. So
no, they're not quite that exciting, but my one experience in a jury room, certainly not that exciting, but there was a little bit of a similar experience where you watch some of the jurors change their mind.
Yeah.
You have, one or two jury members who are trying to persuade the others, and you see some, have more open minds than others. And it's interesting to try watch other members of the public, your other peers, how they try to reach each other. They've heard the exact same arguments, the exact same evidence, and yet they come to diametrically opposed views, and then they try to persuade each other. It's really an interesting thing.
And then if you're a lawyer in the jury room and they know it, then of course everyone looks to you because they figure you've got the inside track and you know more, and they want to know what you think, which isn't always a good thing.
Yeah. Okay, the number 2 movie on the IMDb list is Paths of Glory. That's a 1957 film with Kirk Douglas. You ever seen Paths of Glory?
I've not. I have to confess, I've never seen it.
Yeah, I haven't seen it either. It's a wartime legal movie. I think it involves maybe a court martial. Number 3 on the IMDb list, JFK. What do you say, Gary?
I know that it's sort of a legal movie, but I would not even put it in that category. To me, it's more of like a historical thriller.
That closing argument by Kevin Costner, politics aside, that closing argument by Kevin Costner was iconic. It should be required watching for law students. I think it deserves a place on the list.
It's definitely on my list of top 500. It's just I have, there's always overlap and things like that, but I don't know that I would categorize it as a legal movie per se. So,
yeah, back and to the left. Back and to the left.
Right.
You remember nothing else about the movie, you probably remember that.
Right.
Number 4 on the IMDb list, Gary, is To Kill a Mockingbird. Had to have seen that one coming. What do you think? Does that how does that stack up?
Well, it's tough because it really is dated at this point. It's a hard movie to watch and really feel like you're watching a contemporary movie. There's so many things about it that are dated.
I hadn't thought about it. It's an older movie, obviously, but dated in terms of what, legal procedure or social
just
issues?
The way they talk and the things that, I guess it all just feels very formal in the way that movies used to be, I guess.
Yeah.
It doesn't feel like you're watching a real legal movie. It feels like you're watching a movie and that's scripted and that people are reading lines and stuff like that. And I just think, the book stands the test of time. So I feel like that's the way to go for that one.
Okay. Yeah, that's an interesting take. Okay. All right, let's go to number 5, A Few Good Men. What do you say, Gary? That's probably on a lot of people's lists. One of the first they think of.
Well, it's a great movie, and it's, so much of it is just because Nicholson is such a great kind of villain in that movie. And it's that thing where you see a movie where the guy who's the villain is someone who you actually really like. And so I feel like the viewers are watching that, kind of rooting for Jack, but then they see, oh, he's so dastardly, and so they want him to lose, but he's so good at being so bad in that movie. And so I think that that's why the movie works so well, is because of Jack.
Well, we have this age-old problem in our country, and probably democracy in general. The contest between liberty and order, or the search for truth and order. In that one scene, you want the truth. You can't handle the truth. You want me on that wall. You need me on that wall. I mean, that all kind of sums up this perennial problem we have in democracy between searching for truth and pulling back and saying, we can't go too crazy with it. We have to have some standards and some order the way we do it.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's probably a theme with a lot of the legal movies, is that, it kind of plays along that line a little bit, because otherwise it's too black and white. And so there's maybe something about the person who's being accused where maybe you understand why they did what they did. And so there's a part of you that's kind of rooting for them to get off. And then another part of you that wants the hero to win and make sure that they find that, that person goes to jail or whatever it is. That's the other thing too, is that, of course, so many of the legal movies are criminal law movies, and I don't practice criminal law at all, but it's obviously a very different kind of story when you're talking about someone's life and whether they're going to jail versus, it's hard to make an exciting movie about a civil case. So
yeah. Yeah, that is true. When people ask me if I do criminal work, I say no. It's only disputes over money, and it takes a little bit of the wind out of my sails.
Right.
Not as much drama there. Okay, number 6 on the IMDb list of top legal movies, A Time to Kill, based on the John Grisham novel of the same name. How does that?
I think I never saw it. When I was looking through this list before we talked, and I looked at it and I said, I either didn't see it or I didn't think much of it.
Yeah, I can't recall it either. I do recall reading it.
I violated the rule that they talked about in bar brief for bar studying for the bar. They said, whatever you do before the days before taking the bar, don't go see a movie about the law, because it'll get in your head, wrong principles of law. And I went and saw that movie. I remember that very vividly. It was a fantastic movie. Thank God there weren't any murder questions, I don't think, on the bar exam that year.
Number 7 on the IMDb list, The Rainmaker. Was that another John Grisham one?
Yeah.
Yes.
What about The Rainmaker, Gary?
I think it's a great movie. I think one of the reasons it works is because the villain, the person on trial isn't a person. It's the big bad insurance company, right? And so everyone loves to hate insurance companies, even though a lot of the clients I have are insurance companies. But I know that too well, that it's very easy to hate insurance companies, even though a lot of times they're not the ones to hate. But that's the way people think, because most people have had some sort of a run-in with an insurance company that wasn't pleasant, and so everyone feels like, yeah, let's go after the insurance companies.
Okay, now we're going to get to the movie you told me you had some opinions about. Philadelphia is number 8 on the IMDb list of top lawyer movies of all time. What are your thoughts on Philadelphia, Gary?
So I've often said that it's the most overrated movie of all time. When I saw it, I remember that it was highly acclaimed in Academy Awards and all that. And now looking back on it, I really understand why it was so highly acclaimed. I mean, it was groundbreaking because of the subject matter. So we have to give it that, because for sure at the time it was, AIDS was such a big subject that people didn't want to talk about, and it was so directly confronted. But just from a movie making standpoint, to me, it was so over the top. It was so pulling the heartstrings and the melodrama, and you felt like there might as well be violins playing during every scene. And so from that standpoint, I just personally couldn't enjoy it as a movie, even though I love Tom Hanks and I really wanted to like the movie. But that's always the one that I've said, that movie's so overrated.
Interesting. I somehow I've never seen Philadelphia. But let's go to number 9 on the IMDb list, The Lincoln Lawyer.
Did not see it. Sorry.
Okay. The
I've
Lincoln
got
Lawyer.
my homework cut out for me after this call.
Yeah, there you go. And then number 10, Changeling. I think you said you didn't make it to that movie either.
Didn't see that one either.
I hadn't seen it either.
So right, there's got to be a big asterisk on my list of best movies of all time, because of course I haven't seen every movie
of the ones you've seen. Well, and I told you before I hit record that I've been rereading The Caine Mutiny, and I wanted to see where that came up on the IMDb list. It wasn't on the top 10, but it made it at 15. Have you seen The Caine Mutiny?
I have not.
Humphrey Bogart. That was about the mutiny on the
Right.
on the steamer, the minesweeper, the Caine, where there was a belief that Captain Queeg was insane, and so they deposed him as the captain. And then there was a court-martial scene at the end where it turned out that it was well, I thought it was a great scene about the outsider lawyer, and with the reveal that it was really the villain was really the backstabbing mutineers, because they'd spend the whole book and the whole novel painting what a villainous cretin this Captain Queeg is. Anyway, I thought that was a great movie. And number 23 on the list, My Cousin Vinny. Didn't make it quite near the top 10. What do you make of that?
I love it, but it's almost its own genre, because it's the only legal movie that I can think of that's also a comedy. And I think that's what makes it really unique, is because, usually they're so serious and so dramatic and life and death and all this kind of stuff. And it's such a goofy movie, and it works. I mean, they didn't make it kitschy or silly. I mean, it works because Joe Pesci is great and Marissa Tomei is great. And they pulled off those characters so well.
Yeah, they really did. They really did. I didn't think about that there really aren't that many lawyer movies that are also comedies. Jeff?
One big omission from our discussion that I have to bring up, from the 80s, there's a movie called From the Hip.
Oh, yes. I love that movie.
The cross-examination of Judd Nelson by Judd Nelson of John Hurt. It's a fantastic movie, and it's over the most part a comedy. I'd say 80% of it's a comedy. Fantastic movie. You need to add it to your list, Tim. From the Hip.
It's officially number 418 on my list of overall best movies of all time.
Okay.
It's definitely got a very 80s feel, but it's great. And I don't think it was all that successful. It was kind of like a diamond rough.
Yeah.
Just two other quick questions that were not on this IMDb list. I wanted to ask you about, Gary. Anatomy of a Murder. That's one with Jimmy Stewart.
Didn't see it.
Okay. That was referred during one of the great, Pincus appellate conferences. Someone said you have to see Anatomy of a Murder. And the last one, Inherit the Wind. I
haven't even heard of that one.
That's the one about the Scopes monkey trial.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Yeah,
and I don't know why they changed all the names. There was H.L. Mencken was the Boston, not Boston, the Baltimore reporter who came down. He was in favor of the defendant and free speech. About evolution. Tennessee had passed a law that prevented the teaching of evolution in their public schools. And William Jennings Bryan came down and represented the special counsel for the prosecution. So it was a very populist versus civil libertarian themes going on. Really great flashpoint in American legal history, and a very good movie. I don't know why they changed all the names though. They're all public figures, Jeff. Was there some exposure to defamation?
Maybe not defamation, but there's another legal theory that I feel like
likeness,
false light,
false light, all of those. Yeah.
Okay, well now we've covered what IMDb thinks, those pikers, but now we get to find out what Gary Wax thinks are the top 5 legal movies of all time. So tell us your 5, Gary, and briefly why every lawyer ought to see them.
By the way, before I get to that, I should mention that as a teenager, LA Law was absolutely my favorite television show, and probably has some role in turning me into a lawyer, because I watched it religiously. I loved it. I actually hosted little weekly parties at my house with my friends to watch it. It was kind of a big event.
Did you cheer when Rosalind Shea fell down the elevator shaft?
Probably.
Yeah. Spoilers for those that are now binging it. Sorry.
I wonder if it holds up. And I wonder, it's not one of those, you see Seinfeld, people stream it and watch it, and Friends and those kind of shows. But I wonder if anybody streams LA Law now.
Yeah. I hear they're doing a reboot, though.
Oh, well, I'm sure it'll be terrible, because usually when they do that, they're terrible. So as far as movies, as I mentioned, I think 12 Angry Men is absolutely number one. Just the fact that, the whole movie takes place in one room and it keeps you riveted at the end of your seat. And all of the characters are really so well drawn out. And it really makes you feel like you're in the jury room, and no other movie really gives that perspective. So I really, and I think it stands up over time too, which, a lot of these black and white movies don't.
It does. I watched it for the first time just a few years ago, and what I remember about it is that at the beginning, Henry Fonda is the holdout at the beginning. He's the only one who thinks that the defendant's not guilty, and you kind of think, this guy, he's just some bleeding heart. He just got some problem with authority or something. But then, as he persuades one by one, you wind up as the viewer coming to his view as well. So it's like the movie becomes 13 Angry Men.
Yeah, and it's funny. I mean, so much of that movie, in the way that A Few Good Men has so much to do with having cast Jack as the villain, casting Peter Fonda in that role. Sorry,
is it Henry Fonda?
Henry Fonda, not Peter Fonda. Casting Henry Fonda in that role is, he, especially at that time, he was a guy that you would trust. He was always in the movies as kind of the good guy. And so I think having him in that role probably elevates that character and makes it more believable and makes the movie work even better, just because they cast him. Yeah,
that is a big thing I've come to learn a little bit about. The importance of casting. You have to believe that character. That character is going to carry the theme, the message of the story along, and it has to be believed, or else it's all for naught.
Right. Well, going back to my background in screenwriting, one of the first things you learn in film school is that you really, when you're writing a script, it's not nearly as much about story and setting as it is about character. If you don't create rich characters, then whatever the plot is and whatever the setting is, just is always going to fall flat. So you got to concentrate on writing those characters.
Is there a carryover lesson into the law? Do you have to make does that teach about having to paint your witness, your client, in a good light? Does the attorney, him or herself, also have to be a good character and carry that message and theme through the trial?
I think so. I don't know. I've sat through trials where one or the other side's lawyer is kind of a villain. And I'm not sure if that works or not. I guess it probably depends on the judge and depends on the subject matter of the case. Certainly there's a lot of villain attorneys who make a lot of money winning a lot of really big cases. So it must work somehow. But I would think that with certain jurors, it's a turnoff. With certain judges, it's probably a turnoff. And there's something I always appreciate when I watch a trial involving, let's say a personal injury case, where you're more likely to kind of see a bombastic plaintiff's attorney, to see them a little bit more polite and a little bit more kind of approachable and personable. To me, I'm more likely to kind of jump onto their bandwagon if they're like that.
Yeah. Do you ever see attorneys who kind of play at acting? Maybe they deal with the judge and opposing counsel differently, and then when the jury comes out in the room, they flip a switch and they become someone else.
Absolutely. And I think also that they have kind of, I don't want to call them tics, because they're more intentional than that, but there are certain personality traits that they keep coming back to, or themes that they use, or ways of saying things that they've decided that work, and they pound them over and over and over again. And sometimes it's really effective, actually, when I've seen lawyers do that.
Yeah. Okay, Gary, let's go to your number 2 top lawyer movie of all time.
Well, so it's A Few Good Men, which we've already talked about, but it's people like you said. People always remember the scene with Jack saying, "You can't handle the truth," and it really is one of those top 10 or top 20 movie moments that if you were, we talked a little bit when we started about like adding references in briefs and stuff like that that are about pop culture. And that's one of those references that if you put it in a brief and it made sense to put it in a brief, at least you could feel confident that your audience would know where it was from and wouldn't be scratching their head like, what is this all about?
Yeah.
So
No, that's right. I even yeah, there's certain lines that just get they even get divorced from their context.
right.
My 11-year-old daughter was running around the house the other day saying, "Here's Johnny. Here's Johnny." Like, where'd you even get that from? Did you watch The Shining? What's The Shining?
Right.
No idea what that is, but that certain lines become so iconic.
Right. And probably not Ed McMahon saying, "Here's Johnny." It was probably more from The Shining from a kid. So
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, speaking of Nicholson, he's made a lot of famous lines.
For sure.
All right, Gary, number 3 on your list.
Number 3 is The Verdict with Paul Newman. And I think both number 3 and number 4. Number 4 is True Believer. Both of these movies, I think, kind of come from the same place in terms of why they work, which is that you've got a lawyer that's kind of down and out on his luck, that he's kind of forgotten why he became a lawyer. And
yeah, in the Verdict, Verdict stars, what is it? Is it Paul Newman?
It's Paul Newman, and he's drunk.
He's an alcoholic.
He's a total alcoholic, and he doesn't even want to go to trial because he can't handle the pressure of being in trial because he's such an alcoholic. And in True Believer, which is the next one, it's James Woods, who's like, all he does is represent people growing weed to try and get them out of their legal trouble. And in both of these cases, both of these movies, it works because you're cheering for the lawyer who was kind of down and out, who's now found themselves and remembered why they became a lawyer in the first place, and to help people get their just result in their trial. And even though there's big and bad companies or whoever it is on the other side, whether it's the government or companies or whatever it is, and so it helps you kind of pull for the little guy. Even though it's a lawyer, because of course most people don't like lawyers, so it helps make the lawyer a hero when you see them starting out kind of down and out on their luck. So that both of those movies really work for me for that reason.
Yeah, so it's character driven. It's the plot or the character development of the attorney through the movie that makes it work.
Right.
Yeah. Is there a lesson that resonates for you, or you think that should resonate for the legal community about trying to find some sort of redemption or meaning or hope in the work that we do as lawyers?
Yeah, well, to the extent that we can weave that theme into our cases, if it's applicable, it always helps. I mean, I'm sure you guys feel this way too. Sometimes you're representing a party that's not wearing the white hat at all. That there's a reason why they're on page 1 that someone reading the brief could say, "Ugh, I don't like this company. This company's a bad actor." Now explain, now I've got to read 60 pages and you got to tell me why I should like them and why they should win. I have a case like that right now, in fact, where I'm representing some property owners who got hit with millions of dollars in civil penalties from a city in California because the buildings that they had, they're intended for low income people, are breaking all sorts of fire codes and building codes and all of that. And they've been working with the city to try to improve them. But then COVID happened, and so all the permitting slowed down. And so it was this weird give and take of property owners who clearly have properties that most of us wouldn't want to live in, but they're actually providing a service to a huge swath of the population who needs this kind of low income housing and is trying really hard to work with the city. But you read it and you could read it one way and say, oh, these are slumlords. Why should they win? And so, I think it's really important in a case like that to weave in that theme of kind of trying to show why they actually do wear a little bit of a white hat. Not really the white hat, but kind of they're not so terrible. Maybe that's better than white hat, but just
or that there are no white hats in this story. It's just trying to make the best of a bad situation, or Yeah, that is important. Sometimes sometimes it's easy if you have someone with a white hat, and other times it's not so easy finding that angle. But that's our job, is to find that angle, or get the court to realize that, look, this is not one where you're going to get to feel, go home and tell your wife about the great person that you helped in a case today. This is just one of those that's yeah, our modern life is complicated, and sometimes the outcome, the right outcome, is hard to explain why it's right.
Right, and when you're representing a defendant who gets hit with a wrongful death judgment of many millions of dollars, and you're running into court to try and argue to the appellate court that these procedural rules weren't followed, and that's why we need a reversal. You need something more than just some rules weren't followed, because it's really hard to get over that feeling of, hey, there was a death here and someone needs to be at fault and someone needs to pay for it. So those are always, for me anyway, the most challenging appeals, and in writing the brief to try to humanize the big bad defendant.
All right, and let's get to your number 5 top legal film of all time, Gary.
Yes. Primal Fear.
That's the Richard Gere movie, 1996.
Yes, and Ed Norton. And I think the reason that one works so well is because guilt and innocence is so hard to put your finger on, because you're kind of rooting for someone. You don't know if they did it. Is it this other personality? It's this whole weird thing going back and forth. And the Richard Gere character is kind of duped by his own client, and so it makes you it's constantly trying to figure out who you want to get behind and who you want to root for, and all the twists and turns in it, I think, really make it an exciting movie from that standpoint.
This Primal Fear was about a Chicago defense attorney who believes that his altar boy client is not guilty of murdering a Catholic archbishop. There's so much fodder in our industry, Gary, for creating interesting stories. Obviously, there's a lot of novelists who have come out of legal practice. I'm thinking of John Grisham, who's written a lot of books, have been turned into movies, and there's just a lot of conflict and drama implicit in our line of work.
Have you ever worked on a case where you thought, oh, this would make a great movie?
Yeah, I think my partner is already starting the novel. He's already got the first and last chapters already blocked out.
and which actors could be playing you, Tim, when the movie rights come out?
Oh no, I thought maybe Edward Norton.
There you go.
Okay. All right. Well, Gary, this has been great. Jeff, do you want to subject Gary to the discomfort of the lightning round today?
Sure. Yeah, we got some time for that. So,
right.
Gary, hold on. This is the time for our patented copyrighted segment of the show that answers the most pressing questions that vex appellate nerds around the world. The dreaded lightning round. Short responses, one word, one sentence, if you can.
Okay.
Here we go. Font preference for briefs: Century Schoolbook, Garamond, or something else?
Century Schoolbook.
Correct. 2 spaces or 1 after a period?
2.
Oh my goodness.
Gotta give.
Wow.
I'm sorry, but you gotta give the eyes a way to breathe in between sentences. I don't know why. I know that it makes me an old dad or whatever to only like 2 spaces. I try to wrap my head around the 1 space, but I just need my eyes to breathe in between sentences.
Yeah.
You're not the first. You're not the first who has answered 2 spaces, but you are the proudest of the 2 space position.
Yeah. And I'm going to jump the line here, get to the end of our lightning quiz. Cleaned up, the signal, the parenthetical cleaned up. Do you use it or no?
I don't, but I'm not against it. Generally, I would just get rid of the quotation marks and paraphrase without having to say cleaned up.
Oh, okay. All right. And then in terms of your headings in a brief, your major headings, not a statement of the case or statement of facts, but the argument headings.
Yeah.
All caps, initial caps, or sentence case?
I change my minds every brief. I don't know why. I can't stick to one way of doing it.
Okay. All right.
I lean towards all caps, but I've also worked with attorneys who are small caps all throughout, and I'm fine with that. I'm not really sure which one's better. What's your opinion? I'm curious.
All caps is really hard on the eyes if you're
Yeah.
worried about eyes. It seems like shouting,
Yeah. I think I really don't like first caps. So usually if I'm going to go all caps on the big headings, it's going to be small caps throughout, even on the A, B, C headings. I'm not going to do first caps the way that people generally do.
First caps then just leads to that whole other can of worms of which words do you capitalize. Is such a small word, but it's a verb.
Right.
You have to, like, prepositions, like, do you not capitalize within? It's just a preposition, but it's such a long word.
So neither one of you use all caps on your main headings?
Never.
Okay.
Just for introduction, conclusion, standard of review, but I'll use small caps.
Okay.
I want to ask, because I haven't reached consensus on this yet, I think, possessives. And I use the example Congress. How do you make a possessive out of the word Congress? Is it Congress apostrophe or Congress apostrophe S?
Probably apostrophe S. I usually say it out loud, and whichever sounds more natural to me is what I'm going to go with.
That's my benchmark as well.
Yeah.
You lose today, Jeff.
I don't think I've taken a position on Congress, actually. I don't think so.
I just assume you disagree with me.
Well, Gary, you survived dreaded lightning round. Congratulations. We'll send you a souvenir mug for your trouble. And back to you, Tim.
All right. Well, thanks again, Gary. That's going to wrap up this episode. We're going to thank Casetext once more. Casetext is our sponsor. Each week, we include links to the cases that we discuss from Casetext's daily updated database of case law, statutes, regulations, codes, and more. Listeners of the podcast enjoy a special discount on Casetext basic research at casetext.com/CALP. That's casetext.com/CALP.
And if you have suggestions for future episodes, or if you know Judd Nelson and he wants to come on and talk about From the Hip, please email us at info@calpodcast.com. And in our upcoming episodes, look for tips on how to lay the groundwork for an appeal when preparing for trial.
And if you disagree with Gary Wax that Philadelphia is one of the most overrated movies of all time, please contact Gary Wax directly using 2 spaces after a period. All right. Thanks, Gary. See you next time.
Thanks a lot. Take care.
You have just listened to the California Appellate Podcast, a discussion of timely trial tips and the latest cases and news coming from the California Court of Appeal and the California Supreme Court. For more information about the cases discussed in today's episode, our hosts, and other episodes, visit the California Appellate Law Podcast website at calpodcast.com. That's calpodcast.com. Thanks to Jonathan Caro for our intro music. Thank you for listening, and please join us again.